It's my great pleasure to welcome Sarah here today. We're really lucky to have her as our guest, and I know you're all going to love this webinar. So Sarah is a professor of foreign language teaching at the University of Graz in Austria, where she's the head of ELT methodology, the author of many books on the psychology surrounding language learning, and she is going to help us manage the madness. So, Sarah, thank you very much, and over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. Okay, so let me just zap through a little bit of the slides to get to the beginning. So here we are. It's nice of you to join me. Thank you for coming. I'm not sure if it's good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending where you are, but I hope you're having a good day. So, what's the most valuable resource we have in teaching? We've got lots of tools and things that we can use. Just put in the chat box, what do you think is the most important resource that we have in teaching that we can use? Let's see what your responses are. Jessica, that's cheating. Nice to see you, Jessica, by the way. Yeah, all of these things, but a lot of you are that, yeah, I agree with those. Colleague, patience, very good. I agree with all of these things. They're all important, but fundamentally, you're the most important resource. Teachers are the most important research in teaching, and that's just not my personal opinion. That actually comes from a lot of studies, particularly the meta-studies that you know about probably from John Hattie, and what his work done, whether you get into the sort of mechanics of it, is he highlights just what an important role teachers have, just how influential they are for what happens in the classroom, how they teach, and how learners respond to that. So isn't it strange that we don't spend enough time talking about us as individuals? That we know that we are the most important thing that happens in the classroom, and yet we don't pay a lot of attention to our well-being and to how we're getting on. So the whole of today's session is based on this premise. And the premise is that teachers' well-being is the foundation of good practice. Now, for many of us, that might feel a little odd. So it may feel a little like there's a little sense of guilt about looking after yourself, that actually there's a lot of other things, such as the learner and their well-being, that we should attend to first. But actually, it is my belief that when we look at our own well-being, it's not selfish. It actually puts us in a position to be the best possible teacher that we can be. So the whole of today's session is about looking at your well-being as a teacher, not as a luxury addition, not as some indulgence, but as actually the fundamentals and foundation of what makes good practice. So this is an outline of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit first about what well-being is, just to explain what we understand by it and the approach that I'm taking. Then we talk a little bit about why it's important, particularly for language educators, what some of the issues are. And then we're going to have primarily a very practical session. We're going to look at 4 different areas where we can attend to our own well-being. The first about how we can reduce and manage our stress. Second one, how we can promote more positive emotions. The third about how we can manage our time more effectively. And then working on our work-life balance. And I'll discuss some of the issues with that terminology a little bit later. So what is well-being? We've all got our own understandings of it. And I've taken 2 dictionary definitions because they help me to highlight some things that are important that I kind of want to point out. The first one is an Oxford Online Dictionary, and it's defined as being the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. Well, I get rid of the or, it's all of those things. So it's about feeling comfortable, it's about being physically healthy, and it's also about being happy and feeling satisfied with your life. The health is important, and we'll come back to that a little bit later, in that our mental and physical well-being are tightly interconnected. You can't separate them meaningfully. And they both influence each other in both directions. So we'll come back to that a little bit later, that well-being is also about our physical well-being. Now, there's a term, professional subjective well-being. So for those of you who maybe have a little bit more interest in the research side of things, this is one of the terms that's been used in a lot of the organizational literature that's been looking at the psychology of well-being. And the reason I've chosen it is for some of the terminology. So it's got 3 components. It's having job satisfaction, so being satisfied with your job, finding meaning, finding purpose in what you do. And we'll come back to that again in a moment. It's a lack of negative emotions and a presence of positive emotions. Now, this is important. It does not say no negative emotions. So well-being is not about denying negative emotions. It's not about saying we get rid of those, because negative emotions can be quite important. So think about it with learners. Some learners, if they don't do very well in an exam, for example, if they get a bad result and they're disappointed and it can actually boost their motivation. So when we talk about emotions now, we tend not to really talk about them as positive and negative, but we tend to talk about them more in terms of what function do they have for a person at a moment in time. So when we're talking about our well-being, it's not about some kind of happyology. It's not this idea that you make some sort of imaginary happiness that's unrealistic. It's about saying that overall, we want the balance to be more towards the positive emotions rather than the negative emotions. But the negative emotions are part of life. That's how it is. And it's about learning to manage those, regulate those, and work with them in a way that makes them more effective and not so threatening. And using the positives to get that ratio right. But I'll come back to that again also a little bit later. But I wanted to sort of outline that's part of the notion that I'm taking from. The second basis that I'm taking is the notion of PERMA plus V. PERMA is a framework for understanding well-being that was designed by a man called Martin Seligman, and he's sort of considered to be the god of positive psychology. And what his work is about is that in psychology, there's this idea that we take a more deficit view of people's psychology, so looking at what's wrong and how to make it better. And PERMA is about saying, what is it that make people flourish? How do people enjoy life? What are the signs? What are the things that when everything's going right in somebody's life? What's that about? And this is the model that he has created. And the reason, you don't have to get too caught up in it, but the reason that I'm showing you this is that it's not just about emotions. It's about the different aspects that contribute together to create well-being. So I'll just go through what they stand for. So hold on, I can just switch on my little arrow and then you can see a little bit easier. So the P here stands for positive emotion. So the idea that you have happiness, joy, but also what we call the quiet positive emotions, things like contentment, satisfaction. So it doesn't always have to be large positive emotions, but it can be quiet ones as well. Then we have the E of engagement, which is about feeling purpose, feeling a sense of flow, being engaged with what we're doing. And that's something that teachers tend to feel quite positively about as it is. Then we have the notion of relationships, finding that we have connections with others, social connections, meaningful relationships, finding that we have support. I'm going to skip over the V and I'll come back to that in a moment. The M of PERMA stands for finding meaning, purpose, feeling fulfilled, having a sense of passion about what we do. And the A refers to achievement. Now we have to be careful. It's not achievement as in the material sense. It's achievement as in accomplishing goals and things that are important to you, things that you want to achieve, things that are of value to you. And the reason I'm showing you this model is to understand that it's not just about positive emotions. It's a more eudaimonic view of well-being, which means it's about having sense of meaning and purpose and having social connections. It's a broader understanding than just thinking about positive emotions. The V was added a little bit later and is very important in this. So the PERMA was developed and it's got this sort of social dimension with relationships, but it's quite about the individual psychology. The vitality was added in that we understand that our psychology is embodied. It's about if you have got physical well-being, it's likely to affect your mental well-being positively. And we know that if you have high mental well-being, you're likely to also improve your physical well-being. The two are very tightly interconnected. So that's the sort of background that I'm taking it from, so that we don't have a naive understanding of what well-being is. It's not just about being giddy happy. It's about having balance. That's the right kind of thing. I would agree with that. It's about finding social connection. It's about finding meaning and purpose in what we do. So let's move on. What it is not is a denial of the negative. It's not euphoric happiness. It's not about the Pollyanna view of happiness. It's not about stamping on negative emotions and saying they have no place in life. That's unrealistic. It's about finding that balance, but finding the positive focus, which I'm hoping I'll help you do later. So we've got a poll now to just get a view from people about how much attention, how much explicit attention do you pay to your well-being. So let me go into the other mode. Here we go. This gives you a chance to vote now. If you want to, I don't know if I have to do anything else. Is that it? Does it work? I don't know if you're voting and I can't see if you're voting. It works, good. Okay, thank you, Michelle. Keep having a vote, and then I don't know when I will end this. I'll just give it a minute or two for everyone to get a chance to vote. I don't see any numbers or anything, so I can't see how it's going. Thank you, Susanna. It's really hard. I can't see anything, so I'm not sure. Thank you, Jessica. Okay. I'll just give you a minute to have a vote, and let's have a look, see. If I end the survey, I'm hoping that the results will pop up. Okay, thank you. Oh, I participated in the survey, apparently. I don't know if there's anybody from Macmillan watching that can guide me back if I see the results anywhere. Okay, I can't see the results, I'm afraid, and I don't know if there's anyone at Macmillan listening that can put the results up or that can see the results, because I can't find them. Ah, there we go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Oh, okay. So it's a bit of a spread. So there's not many people saying that they spend a lot of explicit attention on their well-being. The majority of people are in the some. There's some saying quite a lot. So if you add that together, it's not too bad. And the none at all, we're going to work on you today. We're hoping that you'll go away with a little bit more attention to your well-being, and the same for the very little category. We'll do our best to sort of help you get back to that a little bit later. So one of the things I do want to say before we proceed is there is no reason for anybody to be embarrassed or feel shy if they have got a sense that they're approaching a sense of burnout. This is a 45-minute webinar. We cannot possibly achieve big changes in 45 minutes. We can set you on that journey, but we can't make big changes. If you have any concerns about your well-being, please don't be shy or embarrassed to seek professional help for it. It's very common, unfortunately, in our profession, and it needs more support. So if you do have serious concerns, please make sure that you find professional help for that. I also want to make the point that what we're about to do today is looking at you as individuals and the responsibility on things that you can do to help your well-being and protect your well-being. But actually, this is something that should be systemic change. It should be something that is not just you as an individual, but something that your institution, that nationally, that globally, should be paid attention to. But all I can do today is give us those first steps that we start looking at it together. Daria, I'm going to do my best. I'm really bad at that, but I'll do my best. I'm paying attention. Just a few statistics before we go on to just give us a bit of an idea about why teacher professional well-being is important to pay attention to. 70% of teachers in this survey said that their health is suffering because of their job. Teacher well-being is the antidote to some of the problems we have with burnout and attrition. It's one of the things that we can do to help people to flourish in their jobs, to ensure that their health doesn't suffer mentally or physically, and that they can contribute positively to their workplace. One of the things that you have to understand, and this is why it's for me the foundation of good practice, is teacher well-being is the core to not only your own well-being, but it actually leads to you teaching better. If you're in a good place mentally and physically, you're in the best place to teach to the best of your abilities. We all know that the days that you go in and you're not feeling so sparkling, we all have days like that, that's life. But it's so much more of an effort, and your patience is more limited and everything, you get a bit more fractious with things, and that's quite normal. So focusing on your well-being helps you to be a more effective teacher. The research shows that teachers who have higher levels of well-being are more creative, are more effective in their teaching, and of course, quite naturally, their students score higher on test scores, so they actually boosts learner achievement. So focusing on your well-being is not just about you, it's actually better for your learners. Your learners benefit as well when you're in a good place. And you know the expression, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't have anything left to give, you can't give of yourself to your learners, you can't support them in the way that you would need to. So let's have a look at then some practical strategies, and we'll start by looking at the negative emotions and the stress. There are 3 different types of stressors, and I'm only going to focus on the last one of these today. So the first type, life event stressors, are big things like, for example, moving house, the passing of a close friend or relation. So these sort of big events that create a big moment of stress. Chronic stressors are stressors that run in the background a long time. So if you have the role of a carer, for example, if you have ongoing financial problems or ongoing health issues, these are what are known as chronic stressors. And stress is cumulative. So when you have life event stressors and chronic stressors in the background, it raises your overall level of stress, and it means that the daily stresses and hassles are more difficult for us to cope with. They become an extra burden, essentially. Now, I'm not going to talk about these big life event and chronic stressors, but we're going to look a little bit at how we can manage some of our daily stresses and our daily hassles that we deal with. So, in the chat box, perhaps you can share, what are some of the things that cause you stress in your workplace? What are some of the things that are hassles for you in your daily life, in your work environment? Management, bad behaviour, learner behaviour, yes. Colleagues, deadlines, paperwork, weak students, time pressure, administration, paperwork administration, marking, more paperwork, all comes. Yes, students, attitudes, time pressure, traveling, no time for yourself, time limits, paperwork, lack of time. More paperwork, oh my goodness, paperwork, yes, that's a strong theme here. Time pressure, more time pressure, colleagues, workload, sleep problems, we'll come back to those as well, yes, that's a huge issue. Pressure to be high energy all the time, yes, that's very much related to something called emotional labour, Luke, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment as well. Okay, so when we did some research, these are some of the things that came up. And to be fair, I haven't actually put it on this list, which is foolish. The number one factor that was listed by all the teachers was time management, the time pressure, too many things to do and not enough time to do it. But that actually seems to be universal across all kinds of professions. But these are the things that were very specifically related to language teachers. And I'll just let you have a little read through of that and see if there are things that resonate with you. I think some of the things resonate very strongly with the things that you're experiencing. One of the things that we haven't listed here that's particular to language students is the notion of language anxiety. So the fact that our skill as language teachers is always changing. We never reach a level of perfection. And so this idea of perfectionism can be quite stressful for some teachers because they never feel that they've reached that level that they would like to reach. And that's an unrealistic goal. But yeah, time pressure. So these are some of the issues that we have to attend to in our daily lives. But one of the things that that can help us to manage some of these things is understanding that stress is not inevitable. Stress is not actually a medical issue. It's how we respond to things. And stress is actually a perception. So stress is about how we perceive something. It's this idea that we perceive something as demanding so much of us that it's beyond what we can actually give or cope with or manage at the time for whatever reason. So stress is our perception of how we see something, how we experience something, and it's not automatic. So there is a certain amount of influence we have over that, and I find that quite liberating to think that actually maybe I can influence that, maybe I can actually manage and control to some extent the stress and how I experience it. And also, not all stress is bad stress. So the Yerkes-Dodson curve is this sort of U-shaped curve that goes like this, and it's the idea that the first part of that is where actually stress can bring out the best in us. So when we've got a certain amount of stress, a healthy amount of stress, it can actually motivate us and keep us on our toes and keep us kind of bringing out to optimum performance. But when it tips over onto the other side of the scale, then we get into that stage where we get too much stress and we're finding things difficult to cope with. And then our performance actually suffers because of that. So it's about finding that right kind of pressure. So it's not no stress at all. There is no such thing as no stress at all. And definitely being a teacher, there's definitely no such thing as no stress at all. It's about the amount of stress that you feel comfortable coping with that brings out the best in us, basically. So one of the things that the first question we can do is we have to identify our stressors. So this was one of the questions that we had earlier, is you have to look at what it is. And that takes some time. And sometimes if it's not immediately obvious to you what it is, you need to sit back and have a reflect on that and have a think. Maybe write down what moments you notice that you get stressed and what are the things happening at that moment in time. And see if you can start to identify what the stresses are. Excuse me. And then the question is, what's in my locus of control? What can I change? Is there something that I can change about that? And sometimes those things that we have to change are not comfortable. Maybe it involves having difficult conversations, but it depends on how important that becomes to us. Is there something that we can or are able to change about it? And if there is, then we have to take steps to do something about that. The other option is something known as cognitive reappraisal, cognitive reframing. And that's that if we cannot change something, if it's something that is beyond our control, we can change the way that we think about it. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that this is easy, but it is something that we can do to try to help ourselves if this is making us stress. But this positive effect from cognitive reappraisal only functions if it's truly out of our control. So our subconscious knows better than we do that if in fact the stressor is something we could control, trying to reframe it doesn't work. It won't be effective because our brain knows that actually we could do something about that. So this only works when we can't control it. So one of the things that I've done, for example, so when I've got no patience at all, and when I'm waiting for buses and trains and they're late, I'm terribly impatient and I get terribly fractious. And I used to get very impatient when a train would be delayed. And I developed a strategy where I said, you know what, this is luxury time, and every time a train is late, that time I'm allowed to read a book for pleasure. So I always have a book with me. And if I find that my train is delayed by 20 minutes, that 20 minutes becomes luxury time for me, my time, and I'm allowed to read whatever I like to read in that time. And that actually suddenly changes it from being a stressful situation to actually being quite a luxury situation. So you can change the way you frame something. I can't change whether the train is late, but I can choose how I react to it. That's something that's within my control. And this, I think, is a fantastic statement. And this, I think, is actually the key and something that I need to pay attention to myself as well. Many of us feel stressed and get overwhelmed, not because we're taking on too much, but because we're taking on too little of what it is that really strengthens us. So we tend to often be stressed by things that are draining us of energy rather than things that are giving us energy. So doing lots of things that we find we get a lot of positivity out of, that we get a lot back from, that is a thing that actually can boost us and that can act as a counter, as a buffer against stress. And that takes us to the next point. Looking at positive emotions. So well-being is not the opposite of stress, and health is not the opposite of sickness. They're not opposites, but they can be used different ways. We tend to talk about coping strategies to deal with stress, and a lot of the research, a lot of the sort of self-help books up until the movement of positive psychology focused on how to deal with the negatives, how to counter the negatives. But when we understand that definition from earlier on about the fact that it's the ratio of positive and negative that influences our sense of well-being, then you realize that it's not just about coping with the negatives, it's about boosting the positives, making sure that we have more of those positive experiences, building on our strengths, finding ways to utilize things we're good at, and having those experiences of uplifts and positive experiences. So it's not just dealing with the negatives, it's boosting the positives as well to create a little bit more balance and a little bit more ratio. So let's just get a sense of how you feel. Do another poll. What would you say during an average day at work, an average day teaching, would you say that you experience more positive or more negative emotions? Let me go out of here. I have to go to a different screen. Let's see whether you experience more positive or more negative emotions. And if you can just type in the box, one of you, and just let me know if it's working okay, and then I can just see, because I don't have any feedback, so I can't see. And if you could just, when you voted, just let me know that it works. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Luke. That's great. I'll just give you a minute or two to vote, and then we can have a see. I'm really hoping for everybody to be experiencing more of the positives, but we'll see. You all chose to attend a session on well-being, so it suggests that we're all here because we need to have a little bit of a boost in that department, perhaps. Oh, okay. Yes, Henry, you have to press submit at the bottom. That's right. Sorry, I perhaps should have pointed that out to you. Oh, and Samantha, keep delighted. Such a good thing to say. It absolutely is true. We'll talk a little bit how to do that in a moment. Luke, that's great. And hopefully, Luke, if you're in a leadership role, this is so important. If you attend to your well-being, Luke, you'll be able to influence your staff, and hopefully you'll be able to help them focus on their well-being, and all of that will filter down to the students in the end. Good, yeah. Thank you, Ismail. Okay, let's have a look, see. Do you think it's time to finish? Okay, shall I end it? Thank you. Oh, great, the results up. Fabulous. Oh, okay, so that's quite a nice spread, isn't it? Well, I'm really glad to see not too many people in the very negative department, so that's good. And it's great because actually teachers usually love what they do. And it's sort of a little bit of a double-edged sword. We are passionate about teaching, we love being in the classroom, we love being with learners, and there's a lot of positivity we get out of that. So yes, teaching learners can also be stressful sometimes, but it's also one of the very positive experiences we have. Good to see that it's more positive, half and half, but I think generally more in the positive category, which is very nice to see. That's fabulous. So positive emotions are important for different reasons. Now, many of you will, of course, know Krashen, and he was there way before us, despite the critiques about all kinds of things. But Krashen knew that the emotions acted as a filter to how we process and how we think and how we respond to things. And negative emotions tend to create this sort of fight and flight. So it tends to narrow our perspective, narrow what we're doing, and it puts us into a bit of a defensive, protective mode, understandably. But positive emotions have the other effect. So positive emotions, what they call broaden our attention. So when we're experiencing positive emotions, we are more open to new experiences, we're more willing to take risks, be creative. We have a more broadened cognition. Our cognition is open to creative links, creative people, linking with other people, more social. Through that, we build resources, which means that we get new experiences, we get new tools, we get new ideas, and that actually all leads to this kind of positive spiral. So positive emotions don't just feel good, they actually enhance our cognition, enhance our social interactions, and actually lead to increased and boosted positive experiences and start this positive upward spiral. So, right, that slide shouldn't have had those pictures, that text on it, but let's see in the comment box. I wanted to ask you what some of the reasons where you love your job. So you've become a teacher for a reason, or you're a trainer now, or you're a leader in a school, or what are the reasons, what are the things? So here's some examples that came out of the research, but what are some of the things that you get that give you positivity? What are some of the things that you gain about enjoying your job? Let me see in the comment box the things you love about your job. A lot of people writing. Okay. My screen has stuck, so let me see. Okay, working with students, reaching goals, learning new things, helping people, helping learners, maybe job security, helping people, igniting passion, working with the students, contributing to a better society, very nice. This all resonates very strongly with a lot of research that teachers have done. So teachers are very fortunate in the sense that we're in a profession where we do something meaningful that contributes to others and helps others. And that's actually one of the things that can contribute very positively to our well-being. One of the things that is difficult to do is it's hard for people to sometimes create a boundary where they're not just giving to others. And we'll talk a little bit about boundary setting later on in the session. Just to clarify, it wasn't a poll, it was just a question that I wanted to ask, but the slide has changed a little bit. So these are different things that people have cited about why they love their job. And it's just think about how nice it feels to think about the positives of our job, think about the things that we like. We're all going to experience ups and downs in our motivations, and sometimes we can lose sight of these positives when we get caught up in some of the negatives, so some of the stresses. It can be difficult to remember the positives. And simple things like having them on a post-it note and reminding yourself of what you love. Some of the things that have been suggested that we've done with some of our trainee teachers is a gratitude portfolio. So I don't know, but when you sometimes have students that write a thank you note or tell you that they've enjoyed your class, or they give you sort of a little gift, or you have a photograph of a group that you've had a good session with, it's nice to keep those. And in the moments when maybe you're having a little dip in motivation and maybe when things are not going as smoothly as you would like, it's nice to go back and look at that again and just remind yourself of all the nice things about your job and the real positive things. Just to give ourselves that balance so that we don't always just look at the negatives, that we've also got some of the positives to focus on. And this is one of the reasons why. So what do you see in the box here? I've got to confess, this is a bit of a trick question. What do you see in the box? A dot, a blue dot, a blue dot trapped in a box. Dot, dot. Marina, white box. A ball, a lovely blue dot, blue dot, blue dot, blue dot, a blue dot, blue dot, a blue dot, a blue dot, a blue dot. Well, what about white space? So one of the things, it was a bit of a trick question, I have to confess, is we tend to focus on one thing. And in this case, it is natural that everybody focuses on the blue dot in the middle of the box. But actually, there's a lot of white space you could focus on as well. But our attention is drawn to the blue dot, so we focus on just seeing the blue dot, and we almost don't see the white space. And it's a little bit of the same with the positivity things in life, is that sometimes our attention is drawn to the negative things, and we overlook some of the positive things. So I can just give you the example is if I have done feedback from a teaching session, and let's say I have 25 students in my class, and one student criticizes something that I've done in my teaching, and 24 people say, oh, Sarah, I loved your session, and one person said, I didn't like it, I didn't like this, that, and the other. I obsess about the negative person. I forget about all the 24 other people who said how nice it was, and I focus on that one negative person. And that's called the negative bias, and we tend to do that. And so what I wanted to show you with this is we have those positives as well. They're there in how we experience things, and sometimes it's helpful to just remind ourselves not to focus just on the blue dot, not to focus just on the negatives, but just remind ourselves to step back and look at what some of the positives are as well. That's right, Jessica. We tend not to hear the positives. If you don't hear anything went well, you hear only the negatives. That's right. And sometimes just because they didn't say, oh, that was a fantastic session, doesn't mean that they didn't enjoy it. So we have to sort of sometimes remind ourselves very consciously to look for the positives and remind ourselves of that. There is something in positive psychology called gratitude practices. Now, there are lots of interventions in positive psychology about ways to boost your well-being. And gratitude is one way that you can do that. And this is one of the ways that has a very, very strong body of research behind it to suggest that this works effectively, that this helps people. Now, let me make this clear. Gratitude practices are not, again, about ignoring the negative and pretending they're not there. It's just about redirecting your attention to look also at that white space. Redirecting your attention to remind yourself of the positives that you are experiencing so that we don't get a distorted view of what is happening in our professional practice. So daily gratitude practices, I have to confess, I started this a couple of years ago and I do it quite religiously now. So when I go to bed at night, before I switch the light out, I sit in bed and I just take stock of the day. So I just have a little think about what have I experienced during the day, what am I grateful for, what did I enjoy, what were some of the positive highlights of my day. Now, when I started to do this a couple of years ago, I had to really sort of concentrate and think, now, what did I enjoy today? And I had to sort of go through the day. And now I find after a couple of years, I'm sort of overwhelmed with positive things I could think about. And they can also be things like, I'm very glad that I didn't slip on the ice today when I saw somebody else slip. I'm glad that I didn't slip. So it can be things that didn't happen that you're grateful for. But once you get into the habit of doing this at the end of every day, it actually basically trains your mind to start seeing the positives during the day as well. So when you make gratitude practices part of your daily routine, it just helps you to also see the positives. It's not about denying the negatives. It's just about giving you that balance so that you learn to start seeing the positives and create a little bit of balance in the perspectives that you have. Gratitude, Maria, if I can just explain, gratitude is about being thankful for things. So I'm thankful that I had a lovely conversation with a great friend yesterday that was very enriching and very positive. I was grateful yesterday that I helped a student who was struggling with something to succeed, and he actually gave me a high five because he'd succeeded. So gratitude is about being thankful for people, experiences, things that you have had in your life, things that you've experienced that you're happy for. And one of the things that has been suggested is that you can do this gratitude practice in the morning. And I have to confess, I haven't got to that stage yet. I do it in the evening. It's such a habit that I don't even think about it in the evening. I do it automatically. But the idea is that if you do your gratitude practice in the morning, it puts you in a good mood for the whole day. So it makes sense to do it in the morning, but I have to confess I haven't got round to that yet. But maybe it will work for you and you can introduce a gratitude practice when you're having a shower in the morning and think about what you're grateful from the day before and what you're looking forward to positively for the day ahead. So the big number one stressor for most of you and for me as well would be managing time. So this is the riddle. What can you spend but not save? Answers in the chat box. What can you spend but not save? Thank you, Mario. What can you spend but not save? Time. Okay. So it's extremely precious. Time it just goes. You can't save it. You can only spend it. Did you know we have approximately 28,000 days to live? And that doesn't strike me as very many. I'd like some more of those, quite honestly, but 28,000, okay, I'll have to work with that. You need to make them count. And that is about setting priorities. And time management is not about spending more time, creating more time. You can't do that. Time is fixed. But it's about deciding where your priorities lie and how you can manage your time in a way that uses your time in a way that is satisfying for you fundamentally. The purpose of time management, this is something that I think is often misunderstood, and maybe it's also because of some of the literature where time management comes from. Time management is not about making you work more and work more efficiently. That's not the point of time management. Time management is to create more time for you to do the things that you want to do. And when we talk about work-life balance, you'll see how important that is about creating time also for your family, for your leisure activities, for free time, for recovering from being away from work. So the purpose of time management is not to make you work more. The purpose of time management is to make you manage your time in a way that allows you to also pay attention to other aspects of your life. So this is another one of those now. This is what the other slide should have looked like. What are your time management strategies? I tend to find that teachers are extremely efficient and effective with their time. What do you do to manage your time effectively? How do you work with your time management? Let's have a look what you put in the comment box. Okay, a to-do app, having lesson plans, planning, to-do lists. Okay, using an app. Letitia, what app do you use? Just out of interest. Planning, to-do list, making a priority planning list, planning ahead. Planning. Always learning from mistakes, Lucas, always learning from mistakes, I hope. Good, Shane, good for you. Yes, that's very important. Oh, living close to the school, yes, that's a very effective way of it. Being organised, planning your time. Learning to relax, Julia, is very important. Hiding from your emails. Yes, creating boundaries from your emails. We'll talk about that shortly. Taking time for family. Loving your profession, so yeah. Setting priorities. Oh, the time quadrants. We'll come back to that, Jessica, shortly. I've got something on the Eisenhower matrix in a minute. Pomodoro techniques, Letitia, yes, I'll talk to that in a second. Okay, some fantastic. Oh, procrastination, I'm glad you raised that. Yes, we'll talk about that. Okay, so these are the things that have come up in the past. So the first one is about prioritizing our time, trying to find out what it is that makes us most effective. So the Pareto principle is about, it's called the 80-20 principle. That 80% of our output, 80% of the achievement we make comes from only 20%, and finding out what it is where we can be most effective, finding out what it is where we can make the most effect. So when it comes to lesson planning, for example, we found out that teachers have a certain amount of planning that is really important for the effectiveness of the lesson. But then there comes the point after which that time that you spend on the lesson plan is really just staffing, and it doesn't actually lead to any gains in pedagogy or learning outcomes. So it's about finding that balance when it's enough. Knowing where you spend your time, knowing what your productive time of day is, allocating time for family, putting it in your diary, just as important as putting in work-related things. Building in slack time. I think this is great advice for me because I'm really bad at this. So I tend to buffer up one appointment next to the other, and then that creates a lot of stress because you're rushing from one thing to the other, you have no time. So putting in like half an hour where there's nothing planned in between meetings, for example, just allows a bit of a buffer zone. And it just takes down that little bit of stress and allows for things to happen you don't expect. Breaking down big tasks into manageable chunks, so looking at what you could do in a certain amount of time, what would be a small way to go about it, chunking your time, learning to limit your availability. So learning to set boundaries and when you say you're not available. So for example, Mike talked about putting a boundary to emails. So quite a few of the tech companies now in Silicon Valley, but I think we're quite away from that yet ourselves, but quite a lot of the tech companies now have, for example, from Friday evening until Monday morning, the servers for email are not available. So the staff cannot access email over the weekend, which is a good thing because we often don't have the self-discipline not to do it ourselves. So if they have the discipline and they regulate it for us, we have no choice but not to do it. So that's a good thing. Giving up the illusion of perfection. So perfectionism, somebody talked about it earlier on when we were talking about stressors. I've lost my... Perfectionism is one of the biggest problems for teachers. So teachers tend to suffer from perfectionism, wanting everything to be just right. Once you allow yourself to make mistakes, that it doesn't have to be perfect, that it's the best you can do at that moment in time, that in itself will be enough. Have you heard the expression eating frogs first? Have any of you heard of that expression? I think it's from Mark Twain. Eating frogs first is about when you've got a task you don't want to do, start with it. Get it over with first. Eat your frogs first, and then you've got actually time to go on and do other things. Multitasking is well known to be inefficient. Basically, your brain cannot do multiple things at the same time, so you're constantly switching from one thing to the next, and that's very difficult to focus on and to concentrate. So getting rid of distractions and doing one thing at a time. And one way to do that is this Pomodoro technique or time boxing. So time boxing, for example, is where you say, okay, I look how long I think this is going to take. I think it's going to take an hour. So I set aside 1 hour and it has to be done within an hour. Or the Pomodoro technique is where it came from a guy that when he was a student, you know those kitchen timers that look like a tomato? So he had one of those and he would work very intensely for 20 minutes with no distractions, just very intensely. And then when the alarm went off after 20 minutes, he'd take a 5-minute break. And then he'd do another 20 minutes and a 5-minute break. Another 20 minutes, and then he'd have a 15-minute break and then go on. And so breaking up it into these sections. So it's a way of making sure that you focus, that you don't get distracted and try and do too many things at the same time, setting in priorities, and setting also time for family and for friends and for other people to do things. And a big thing for us in education, particularly, I think, is learning to say no. And if we understand that saying no to one thing allows us to maybe say yes to something else. So it's not being, you don't have to say it in a bad way, you can say it in a kind way when you say no, but saying no to one thing frees up time and allows us to be able to say yes to something else. And this is, I think, an important notion. Whether you use this matrix or not doesn't really matter, but the idea behind it is important. So the Eisenhower matrix is about putting things into this quadrant so that you decide, is something, for example, very urgent and important, it has to be done now? Is it urgent but it's not important, so I can probably delegate it to somebody else perhaps? Is it important to me but not urgent? Then I have to decide when I'm going to do it and plan some time for it. And if it's not important and it's not urgent, you can probably dump it and get rid of it. Now, which of those boxes do you think is the most important? Which number box do you think is the most important in terms of time management? Okay. Well, I'll give you my opinion. The most important is actually number 2, because it's about prioritizing things that is important to us. And what can happen in life is we get so caught in number 1 with the busyness of dealing with every day-to-day stuff that the things that are really important to us but they're not pressing get abandoned and we don't get around to them. And these can be the things that are actually very deeply satisfying to us. These can be projects and things that are important to us. So prioritizing our time means that we are not only reactive. So number 1 box is very typically about being reactive to things that are happening. Number 2 box is about being proactive, deciding where we spend our time, what is important to us, and how we want to go about managing our time in that way. So the last thing that we're going to look at is about work-life balance. And I'm going to tell you why I don't like the term work-life balance. In fact, you tell me, can you imagine why I don't like the term work-life balance? There are 2 things in there that I don't like. Can you imagine why I don't like the term work-life balance? What it is that I'm unhappy with that term? That's right, Julia. That's right. And that's also right. Absolutely. Yes, that's right. So for me, creating the notion of a work-life split is nonsense. We have one life, and it includes work, and it includes non-work things. And there is no magic balance. There is no ideal scenario that we are aiming for. There is no one-size-fits-all magic work-life balance. So the whole notion of the term is problematic for me. Problematic that we split work and life as if they're 2 separate things. We only have the one life. We do have work and non-work to synthesize. And balance is an unfortunate choice of term, as if there is some kind of equilibrium that we're aiming for, some kind of magic ratio. Somebody called Claire Fox, who's a consultant, uses the word symbiosis. And I actually much prefer this idea of how you synthesize and integrate the different aspects of your life and bring them together in a way that creates harmony for you. There is no magic, and it's constantly changing for everybody, but we find ways to integrate these different aspects of our lives and find it so that we can get some sense of harmony about how we go about it. But we have to not compare ourselves to others. Everybody has different needs, everybody has different wants, and everybody finds themselves in a different phase of their lives. So, for example, somebody who is maybe young, doesn't have commitments, doesn't have children, is building up a career, maybe in a very different life phase to somebody, for example, who has got 3 small children and an aging relative that needs their attention. So people in different phases of their lives have what's known as different centers of gravity that pull them in different directions. So you cannot compare your life with somebody else. Everybody is different, and everybody has their own way, their own needs, their own things that they have to synthesize together. But we all have work and non-work to synthesize. If we only have work, we risk being vulnerable because we're one-dimensional. And that means that if we only have work in our lives and something happens to affect our work life, something negative affects that, it makes us very vulnerable because we haven't got other things to draw on to give ourselves balance. So everybody needs to have some sense of work and non-work and some kind of distancing to work to give themselves other perspectives on their lives. It changes, it's dynamic, and I think this is really important. There is no magic ideal. There is no magic, that's it, I've got it, I've got my work-life balance sorted, everything's in order. One, that never happens, you never reach that end state, and it's not the same for everybody. There is no magic ratio for everybody, it's different. And this is the key thing. For teachers, we love what we do, and so spending time on what we do in our free time is often not a problem. It's about making sure that it doesn't take over completely, making sure that we don't neglect the other people in our lives who also need our time, and that we don't neglect our time away from work. But we are fortunate in many ways that we often love what we do and we get a lot of positivity out of it. And that's why, particularly for educators, we cannot talk about it in the same way as for people who don't get much satisfaction out of their job. So given that we find a lot of positives out of our job, that we love what we do, we get meaning from what we do, that also means that what we understand as a synthesis of work and non-work is perhaps different than it is for other people. Okay, so I was going to ask you, this was another one of those slides that should look a little bit differently. I was going to ask you, what is it you do to recharge yourself? What is it you do to get away from work to recharge your batteries? Perhaps you can put in the chat box, what is it you do to recharge your batteries? Well, Olga, it's something to think about, isn't it, I suppose? Taking a walk, watching films, listening to music, exercise, walking the dog, reading, cooking, yoga, reading with friends, listening. That's very nice. Okay. Very nice. Oh, that's an interesting one. Prima bonsai, that's interesting. Well, that's interesting for two reasons. So let me pick up on just two things that I'm going to highlight here. So one of the things we know is that very often when things are very stressful, we often actually withdraw from other people because we're trying to manage other things. But in fact, we get a lot of strength from being with others. So even introverts who need time alone more than they need time with other people, when things are extremely stressful, they also benefit from social connection. Maybe in a different way, but social connection is very important for our overall well-being. No man is an island, as you probably know. Going in the garden is in there because humans are very connected to nature still. So what has happened is through the urban revolution, so societies have become very urbanized, but the human body hasn't actually caught up. So we need to spend time in nature in the countryside. So we've got things here like gardening, going for walks, being in the countryside, going on picnics and so on. And that being outdoors, spending some time in nature is very, very good for our well-being. And it's a great way for us to also recharge our batteries and get other time. Okay, so getting near the end of the seminar, I've got 5 minutes left. Can I ask you to do this now? Stand up. I actually can't see if you're doing this. I'm going to trust you. There's two things to do. Either stand up and walk on the spot for a count of 10, or stand up and stretch both of your hands over your head for a count of 10. I'll do the walking on the spot. Hold on. So stand up and count for 10. Okay. I think that's 10. Okay. Are you done? Are you all energized? Right. Well done if you did that, because that was your first step to boost your psychological and your physical well-being. So what we are going to just talk about briefly now is that our overall well-being is very strongly connected to our physical well-being. So we have, if you remember in the model at the beginning, the PERMA model, we talked about PERMA plus V, which is plus vitality. And we talk about the health triangle. So the health triangle has 3 components. It's the quality of our sleep, the quality of our nutrition, and the amount of exercise that we do. And that putting those 3 things together contributes to our physical health and our mental well-being. And very often, of course, the thing that we sacrifice most is sleep. So that when we're short of time, the thing we cut into is our sleep. But actually, the quality of our sleep is critical to our well-being, to being refreshed, being able to cope, and actually being able to manage stress and also be able to see the positives and have the patience for that. Nutrition is about the energy source that we take, the energy we put in our bodies, and that contributes to the quality of output, whether that's mental or physical output. And exercise is simply good for our brains, so that we know that, for example, with learners in class, what we've just done, if your learners are feeling a little bit peaky and they're getting a bit sort of weary, just get them to stand up, do an exercise. If they have a Let's think. If you have a role play to do, get them to do the role play standing up for a change. And what it does is it just literally gets the oxygen flowing to the brain. It enlivens everybody a little bit more and gives them a little bit more energy. We spend a lot of time sat down, and the more we can do that's movement, every little thing is contributing to our physical resilience, fundamentally. The final point to make is about detachment. Detachment is about investing in the quality of our non-work time and learning to deliberately rest. Is that we take time away from work and from things connected with work. It doesn't mean that we just have to switch off and disconnect. But detachment is about putting distance between yourself and the work things, thinking about something else for a change. So that might be, for example, if you play tennis. You might really get into a tennis game, so much so that you're only thinking about the tennis game. And that's detachment. That's switching your brain off physically and mentally and deliberately being away from work and giving that little bit of distance. And learning to deliberately rest, finding that you have time to, if you have a little bit of sleep, that's perfectly okay, Marina. A little bit of a toes up can also give you a little bit of a boost to carry you through the afternoon. The last thing to say about this webinar is, I hope it's given you a bit of inspiration to look after your own well-being, for your own sake as well as that for your learners. But the last thing I want to say is there's no shoulds about this. There's no you ought to be doing this, you should be doing that. You shouldn't start stressing yourself now about, oh, I need to do more about my sleep, I need to do more about this. You have to find your own way and you find what works for you. And if you take nothing else from today, all I would like you to take away is that you are important, your well-being is important, and attending to that is fundamentally the foundation of good practice. And that if you take time to look after yourself, you will be a better teacher, you will have better relationships in your life, and it will be good for you more fundamentally. There's no one way to do this, but you are valuable, you make a huge contribution to your learners' well-being, and you should look after your own well-being in the first place. I hope this is maybe one step on that journey for you. Thank you very much. I think I have time for questions.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, thank you so much. That's a wonderful Christmas present for all of our teachers who've joined today. And I'm sure the first thing we'll note in our gratitude journals tonight is our gratitude for your great webinar today. So yes, we still have a few minutes left for some questions, but just obviously I'd like to sort of thank you, Sarah, on behalf of everyone at Macmillan Education. I'd also like to thank some of the team here, Sonali, Casio and Piotr, who do lots of work behind the scenes and are much better at responding to all the technical issues than I am. And just to let everyone watching know that you will get a lovely certificate for attending today's session, and that will be sent to you via email. So you should get that in the next 2 or 3 days. We've also recorded this webinar, so that will be available next week on our YouTube channel, and you can see the videos from the other webinars. And also, we're going to have a break now for Christmas, but we're back on the 23rd of January. Matt Hayes is giving a presentation on global citizenship. So if you'd like to find out more about global citizenship, please register for that session in January. So, a few minutes left for some questions. Sarah, I noticed one question in the chat box.
Yeah.
I don't know what your advice would be, but
reading.
What advice would you give a teacher who feels that they are under stress, but they're not sure what the source of that stress is, why they're feeling stressed?
Yes, I think if the only person who I can identify stress is you, so nobody can really, but you can be guided to that through questions. So you might want to sort of sit and talk things through with a very close friend. If you've got somebody that you can trust and that you feel comfortable opening to, that would be one way that you could, through questioning and discussion with each other, open questions, you might be able to start identifying it. Or otherwise, maybe just keep a journal where you note down the moments that you feel stressed and what things are happening at that time, and start to look yourself to see if you can find patterns and identify what it is that's causing you stress or that's leading to stress at that moment in time. The whole notion of stress being a perception means that only you can identify what is the stressor for you. And it's sometimes, the person asking that question is right, it's not always immediately obvious. So it does sometimes take some time and reflection to sit and look, because it's often a series of factors coming together. It's not always so straightforward, but then it's about teasing that apart and looking at which of those could I maybe affect, which of those could I maybe control, maybe I could deal with one part of it and see if that helps. And then you start sort of teasing it apart a little bit. I noticed that a couple of people asked about books that I would recommend. I'm just going to turn my back on you for a second. I'm not being rude. I'm just turning my back on you for a second because my books are behind me. And I can't remember the name of the book that I want to recommend. Oh, there it is. So it's called The Elephant in the Staff Room by an author called Chris Eyre, E-Y-R-E. And that's a very nice, very useful, very hands-on book that I absolutely love about mental well-being and psychological strength and resilience amongst teachers very specifically. So I think that would be, someone should put it on their Christmas wish list.
Great. So do you have any more questions for Sarah while she's here?
Thank you for your lovely comments, and I hope it's useful and I hope it inspires you to protect yourself.